Pokemon, a franchise everyone grew up with, unless you were born before the 1980s. Whether it was because of the games, the anime, or the cards, most people to this day know what Pokemon is. A franchise that made us fall in love with their regions, their characters, and especially the Pokemon. With a completely unique variety of options unheard of for every other type of game, from starters to legendaries, even fossils. Out of all these groups, there's one that always picked with my attention, and those would be the pseudo-legendaries. Really difficult to catch and evolve Pokemon, most of the time being really bad early on, but that once they reach their full potential, have stats that are comparable to even legendaries, therefore their name, Pseudos. In every region, there's only one of such Pokemon, except in Hoenn for some reason. They are constantly amongst the greatest Pokemons in their respective generations, except for Gudra. Oh, poor Gui baby. Throughout the years, the category has been consistent mostly for only dragons, with only two exceptions. And I would like to see more variety when it comes to their typings. I looked at every single Pokemon in the Pokédex and decided which one was the most fitting to be considered the pseudo of their respective typing. Of course, this is not just randomly selecting the Pokemon that I like the most, so I decided to give a set of different rules. The Pokemon cannot be part of any other group of Pokemon. Pokemons like Paradox and Ultra Beast that are too weird in and of themselves to a point that some people could consider them legendaries. Mythicals, because some people can even argue that they are even rarer than legendaries. Legendaries because that's the thing that they are trying to replicate. And also taking out starters and fossils, because there are still Pokemon that are guaranteed throughout every possible gameplay. So, I don't like to put them here. However, the only group that really gets affected here would be the fossils, because those are the ones that have the most amount of interesting rock-type Pokemon, and not having any of them for the pseudo is kinda weird. So, I'm gonna throw the honorable mention right now of both Tyrantrum and Aurorus. Preferably, they will have a single typing, because that way they would more accurately represent the thing that they are trying to. The Pokemon cannot have a gimmick, otherwise Pokemons like Slaking, Palafin, and Wishiwashi would be as simple as taking out the restriction that they currently have. And last but not least, they can only represent a single typing. That means that a Pokemon like Pyroar, if it's already considered the pseudo of the normal type, cannot be considered for the fire type. So, without anything else to explain, let's start with... The normal type is a type specialized in... Usually, the normal type have been seen as a jack of all trades, but a master of none. But that doesn't mean that they haven't had a good amount of iconic Pokemon, including the creator of them all, Arceus. I had multiple options to choose from, such as Porygon Z, Blissey, or even more recently Ursaluna, but in reality, it was set in stone. The Pokemon that deserves to be called the pseudo-legendary of normal type has to be Snorlax. Not only his stats are already pretty good, not only he's also one of the fan favorites of the entirety of the franchise, but he also has a lot of assets to back him up. A unique C-move, a Gigamax form, even having multiple games where he's a relevant part for the plot. You can even argue that the big guy is the most iconic normal type in the history of the franchise. And with all of the things backing him up, I think that it was a pretty obvious choice. Next up, we have the water type, the most common type in the entirety of the franchise, with some of the most simple yet effective concepts that any Pokemon could ask for. From sea animals, to water-based vegetation, to Palkia. Why are you a water type? Most people would take the most obvious choice here. However, I believe that there's a Pokemon that deserves the spot even more, and that is Milotic. Milotic is a Pokemon introduced in the third generation of Pokemon, and is a perfect representation of what Hoenn is. A place full of water, and also she's based on a sea serpent. But why take the inferior sea serpent when you can have the water dragon that is Gyarados? And to be fair, he's most likely the right choice to make. However, I have 3 reasons as to why I prefer to give it to Milotic. First, I don't want this to be a list that only takes into consideration the first generation, because I think that would be extremely boring. Second, even though this is not gonna be a definitive factor in every single spot in the list, he's just too easy to catch. In every single gameplay of every single generation, you're gonna have at least 30 different opportunities to catch a Magikarp and turn into a Gyarados. And last, and the reason as to why I give the edge to Milotic, is that it's just a much better representation of what the water type is. She is a sea creature rather than a dragon, she is a pure water type, compared to the Gyarados water flying double typing, and compared to the Gyarados physically offensive nature, Milotic is a much more specially oriented Pokemon, something that is much more common amongst most water types. As such, Milotic takes the honors. Other honorable mentions would go to Kindra, Starmie, Tentacruel, and Dondozo. The grass type is an interesting case. They have been historically related with mixed attackers and solid defensive Pokemon. Pokemon such as Mega Venusaur and Amoonguss have been some of the premier examples of this. So it just made sense to me that after looking at every single grass type, the last two options were gonna be defensive Pokemon, in Ferrothorn and Tangrowth. Both Pokemon had things against their case. Ferrothorn only having 54 special attack doesn't seem like something that a mixed attacker would have, and Tangrowth having a low special defense is not what would you consider a mixed tank. However, they are the two that follow more faithfully the spirit of the grass type, and between these two, the one that I have to choose is Tangrowth. With a huge move pool, a with evolving condition, and representing an ancient plant, it just makes sense to make it the poster boy of what a potential pseudo-legendary grass type would be. The only thing that is lacking to be considered a pseudo in the first place is the 600 base stat total, because everything else, it just fits perfectly. And combined with the pure grass typing, it was a no-brainer. Other honorable mentions would go to Roserade, Toadscrew, and Serena. When you think about special attackers, one of the first types that comes to your mind must be the fire type. When you think about a Pokemon of this typing, only one thing comes to your mind. It's gonna be an offensive threat, or Hitran. And there's a lot of Pokemons that just barely miss the cut. Pokemons like Centiskorch, Chandelure, Pyro, and probably the most surprising to you all, Arcanine. All of them were considered to be the pseudo of this typing, but just fall flat. But how is it possible that Arcanine, a Pokemon so prevalent, is not even considered to be the best option for this typing? Honestly, if you say that he's your option, I don't blame you. The only reason as to why I'm not putting it is because he's not Magmortar. With a high special attack, and a design that seems to be created by the fire gods themselves, it's just logical for him to be here. With a tough method of evolving, and a move pool that makes you wonder how is he not a legendary in the first place, he's just the perfect mold to be considered a pseudo-legendary. I don't know what else to tell you to convince you, but for me, he's the clear-cut winner. Ah, fighting. What a beautiful sight. Two muscular men in tight clothing. Wait, this was supposed to be a Pokemon video. The fighting types are the poster boys for two things, resistance and strength, usually knowing a plethora of physical attacks, and moves that strengthen their bodies. Since Generation 1, the Pokemon that embodies the best these aspects of the fighting type is, surprisingly enough, a recent addition, in Gen 9 Annihilate. With a great ability, an insane variety in its move pool, he checks every possible thing that you want him to have in the list. And just look at him! His strength was so big that his anger left his physical body. How can you not support this decision? Some honorable mentions would go to Machamp, Hariyama, Conkeldurr, and of course, Lucario. Working as the opposite of fighting type, in the second generation it was introduced the dark type. Compared to the noble nature of the previous typing, the dark type Pokemons usually use cheap tricks to get things going. That's why Pokemons like Spiritomb, Grimmsnarl, and Zoroark are among the quote-unquote honorable mentions. But among these pranksters and disillusionists, we can find one noble samurai, called King Gambit. With insane stats, evolving after turning into the king of an already really strong Pokemon, and having an absolutely gorgeous design, King Gambit immediately turned himself into a Pokemon that we never knew that we needed. Oh, and you see that thing that he's sitting on? That's his hair. Ah, Psychic type. The typing that was so broken that had to be nerfed to the ground for every other typing to get a chance. Historically related with legendaries and huge special attackers, the Psychic type was one of the toughest to rank out of them all, because of its insane variety in both quality and quantity. But I think that a right choice has to be Alakazam. He has everything to be considered a pseudo-legendary. An iconic design? Check. Trait-based evolution? Check. Having an interesting stat spread? Check. A move pool that is so ridiculously deep in both sides? Check. I almost put another Pokemon above Alakazam, but after thinking it seriously, the pros of this guy are just too much. The honorable mentions goes to Espion, Armarouge, and Gardevoir, which would have been the chosen Pokemon if it wasn't because she had a typing added in Gen 6. If it wasn't because of that, this spot would have been a lock for her. Ooh, spooky. Wait, I'm recording. Related with graveyards, abandoned places, and highways at 3 AM if you are drunk, the Ghost type has been definitely one of the coolest typings that has ever been introduced in Pokemon. With some of the greatest Pokemons ever under their belt, I think that it's unfair that the Ghost type has to this day only a single Pseudo. And to be honest, the competition between all of these Pokemons was really tough. Dusknoir and Delmice win the honor as a potential new Pseudo from the physical side, and there were a total of 3 different candidates to be considered. Gengar barely missed the cut because I didn't want that a 3rd Gen 1 Pokemon so early on. Please Gengar fan, don't kill me, please. And also, the one that hurt me the most was Aegislash. The second Pokemon that I liked the most was so close to be the chosen one, but he was part of those gimmicks that I said in the start of the video, so sadly I couldn't put him. But if someone is gonna take his spot, I'm not mad that the one taking it is Chandelure. With a crazy special move pool, all 3 of its abilities being really good, and evolving by stone, I hope that you understand why I picked him above Gengar. Besides, I believe that Gen 5 is a really underrated one, and I wanted to give some love to some of the Pokemons. Speaking of which, you know that it was coming, you know it. Dragon type has always been the love boy for Game Freak in order to give them new Pseudos. But they still deserve in this list at least one, even though not in real life. However, if there's one dragon that totally deserved to be considered a Pseudo, and for some reason they didn't give it to him, it's Haxorus. The Baxcalibur, before Bats, was even a concept. An insane high attack with a plethora of different attacks and boosting moves. It should have been him. If it wasn't because Hydreigon came out, I have no doubt that he would have been selected instead. If at any point in history a generation deserved multiple Pseudos of the same type, it should have been this one. And the honorable mentions would go to both Tyrantrum and Flygon. And before anyone asks, I'm recording this before the Indigo Disc DLC, so I have no information about the status of Archaludon. I think that he's gonna be a Pseudo, but I'm not sure. If he ends up being one or not, he's still an honorable mention here. This is the end of the video. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you want part 2, I want this video to reach a total of 10 likes. And if you liked it, just comment and subscribe. You are open to be here in this house, in this home. Well, see you next time. Bye bye! Oh, look at that.